They say betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from the one who swore to protect you. But nothing prepared me for the night my world crumbled. Not with a scream, but with silence. It started with a midnight call, a panicked nurse on the other end of the line. "Mrs. Whitmore, your mother suffered a cardiac episode. We need you at Savannah Mercy Hospital right away." My fingers trembled as I reached for my coat, heart hammering with dread. In the stillness of our bedroom, I glanced at the man sleeping beside me. Gavin. My husband of 16 years. His breath steady, his face peaceful, as if nothing in the world could disturb his sleep. I whispered his name. He didn't stir. I whispered again, louder. "Gavin, it's Mom. She's had a heart attack." One eye cracked open, irritation flooding his face. "At this hour? Call me if she dies," he mumbled, rolling over. And just like that I knew. Something inside him was long gone. Something inside me too. The corridors of the hospital were sharp with disinfectant and cold with dread. My mother, Margaret Whitmore, was already in surgery by the time I arrived. Tubes, beeping monitors, white sheets hiding a life that once guided mine. The doctor gave me the odds in numbers I barely heard. I stood outside the ICU, staring through the glass, remembering the days she used to sing to me in that grand old piano room in Wisteria Manor. The place we called home. The place we cherished more than anything. I needed Gavin then. Not just as a husband but as family. He didn't show. Not even a text. At 4 a.m, my phone buzzed. A message from Gavin. Just 5 words. "House is sold. Leaving tonight." My knees buckled. I read it again. "House is sold. Leaving tonight." I didn't know whether to scream or laugh. I knew something had been off with him lately. He had become secretive, controlling. Disinterested in my family, in me. But this was war. I stared at the ICU lights glowing above my mother, the monitors ticking away her borrowed time. And then I did what any woman raised by Margaret Whitmore would do. I stood up. And I prepared to fight back. 3 months earlier, I'd started noticing irregularities. Our joint accounts had strange withdrawals. Antique furniture was disappearing from the manor. Gavin said it was for refinishing. He'd been taking calls outside, whispering. That's when I reached out to Riley Chen, an old college friend turned private investigator. Smart, discreet, lethal in the world of fraud. "You were right to worry," she told me. "Your husband is planning something. And it's big." The documents she sent me had my blood running cold. Gavin had forged power of attorney. He was shopping the estate to buyers under false pretenses. There were wire transfers to accounts in Belize. Travel bookings to Colombia under a different surname. But I didn't confront him. Not yet. Because I remembered something my grandmother, Evelyn Harrington, once told me as a girl. Don't slap a snake when you can watch it slither into a cage. My grandmother wasn't just sentimental about Wisteria Manor. She had turned it into a fortress. She established an irrevocable trust before her passing, locking the deed behind legal walls no man could climb. Gavin never knew. And now, as I sat with my mother in critical care, I realized why Evelyn had done it. Not to protect brick and timber, but to protect blood. History. Truth. Gavin thought he was clever. He thought the timing was perfect. With my mother near death, he assumed I'd be too broken to notice. He didn't realize I had already mirrored every document, frozen critical accounts, and rerouted ownership privileges through the trust's legal administrator. Riley had installed silent cameras inside Wisteria Manor. That night, while my mother fought for her life, I watched Gavin celebrate in the drawing room with his mistress, Tessa Monroe, a woman I once hired to assist in the estate's foundation fundraising. They toasted champagne, kissed under the chandelier, and packed heirlooms into moving boxes. The same chandelier my great-grandmother polished before every Christmas. My breath trembled, but I did not cry. Instead, I pulled up a number on my phone and hit dial. "Mr. Briggs," I said calmly. "I understand you believe you've purchased Wisteria Manor from my husband. I'm afraid we need to talk." On the other end, the man's voice was cheerful, clueless. "Oh yes, Mrs. Whitmore." Gavin said the estate needed to be offloaded quickly. "I wired the payment this morning." I let the silence linger before I replied. "Then I suggest you contact your bank before you become the victim of real estate fraud." As dawn broke over Savannah, streaking gold through the hospital windows, I closed my eyes and whispered to my unconscious mother, "Don't worry, Mom. I'm not going to let him win." The trap was set. And Gavin Whitmore, for all his arrogance, had just stepped straight into it. The house he tried to steal. The life he tried to erase. The woman he thought he'd broken was about to break him. Next stop, the airport. Because Riley had just sent me a live feed from security. Gavin and Tessa were already in line for their flight. This wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about legacy. About deception. About revenge written in ink and sealed in blood. And I was just getting started. The moment I ended the call with Colton Briggs, my heart was still racing. He had been Gavin's chosen buyer, a wealthy property investor with a taste for historic homes he could flip into luxury bed and breakfasts. But what Gavin didn't know was that Colton had once been sued for negligence on a similar estate in Charleston, and his lawyers had learned to double-check everything. "I just pulled the contract," Colton said after calling me back. "None of the signatures matched the trust documents filed with the county. Your husband gave me forged clearance." His voice was shaking now. "This could ruin me." I softened my tone. "Then do exactly as I say. Call your bank. Freeze the transfer. Cooperate with the FBI." His breath hitched. "FBI?" I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "They've been building a case against Gavin for weeks. You're just the tip of his scheme." Back at the hospital, the ICU buzzed with the hum of machines, but my mind was far from sterile white walls. Riley texted me from the security system she'd patched into the manor. "He's gone. They just left. Luggage packed. Tessa took your mother's sapphire brooch from the dresser." I stared at the screen. The brooch had been in our family since 1911. "Let them run," I replied. "They won't get far." What Gavin didn't know was that I'd rerouted every access point at Wisteria Manor to alert both me and Agent Marla Ruiz, our contact at the FBI, the moment a flagged person entered or exited the grounds. And even more importantly, Riley had planted invisible security tags on several boxes Gavin had unknowingly packed. Even if he got through TSA, those tags would sing like a choir under UV light. But I wasn't done. Not even close. I opened my mother's old mahogany briefcase, one she had insisted on storing under lock and key inside her hospital closet. Inside were the original trust documents, along with Evelyn Harrington's final handwritten notes. She had anticipated someone like Gavin long before he entered our lives. She had even left a sealed envelope labeled, "In case of betrayal." I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a single sentence. Asterisk, "Wisteria belongs to the blood that remembers it." Asterisk along with a key. I knew immediately what it unlocked. 2 years earlier, my grandmother had shown me a hidden compartment beneath the fireplace in her study. Inside, she said, were records no one else had seen. Names. Numbers. Journal entries. Legal traps only she and the trust administrator could decode. I had forgotten about it. Until now. And with Gavin trying to erase every trace of the past, that hidden cache might hold the final piece to the trap. Meanwhile, Riley had driven straight to the airport. Her contact in TSA forwarded surveillance footage in real time. Gavin looked smug in his dark tailored suit, the one I had bought him for our 10th anniversary. Tessa clung to his arm in a designer wrap dress. My dress, stolen from my personal closet. The audacity made me want to scream. Instead, I took a deep breath and hit send on a group message to Agent Ruiz and Riley. "He's boarding. Initiate intercept." I didn't have to wait long. My phone rang. Agent Ruiz's voice was firm. "We've locked the gate. Security is stalling them at check-in. But there's something else you should know. Your husband isn't just leaving with your jewelry and money. We found blueprints in his email for a demolition permit, scheduled to begin tomorrow." My heart skipped. "He's demolishing the manor?" "It's under a shell company he registered last year. He forged environmental reports to declare the home unsafe." I closed my eyes. He wasn't just stealing. He was trying to erase us. Riley was already one step ahead. I'm en route to Wisteria now. If there's a safe hidden in that study, I'll find it. I opened my own phone and launched the estate's private security app. Every room was still, the house quiet except for the slow blinking lights of the alarm system. I pinged the master study and activated the lockdown timer. an emergency feature Evelyn had installed during the restoration. Once triggered, any unauthorized entry would seal the doors and spray a harmless mist of UV-reactive dye. The person would glow purple under detection lights for weeks. And then, like clockwork, another alert pinged. Riley's voice buzzed through. "Elena, she's back." Tessa just doubled back to the manor. She must have slipped away during Gavin's arrest. I grinned. Let her try. I've just armed the study. We both watched through split screens as Tessa scaled through the side window like a thief in stilettos. She moved fast, clearly looking for something. Probably the same documents Gavin had failed to destroy. I whispered to the screen. "Go ahead, darling. Open the safe." When her fingers hit the final dial, the door swung open, and then everything locked. The spray released in a quiet hiss, and the camera inside showed her frozen in place, coughing, confused. The countdown display flashed red above her head. She was sealed in. Marked. And done. Back at the airport, Gavin had finally been pulled aside. Ruiz informed me later that when they opened his carry-on, it contained a forged will, multiple passports, $80,000 in various currencies, and photographs of estate properties across Georgia and South Carolina. All of them marked with the same handwritten notes. Target family. Medical crisis. Accelerate sale. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just about Wisteria Manor. Gavin had been running a serial fraud ring, exploiting families during moments of illness and grief, forging documents, and laundering money through fake development firms. He had done this before. But this time, he had picked the wrong woman. I walked into my mother's hospital room. Her eyes fluttered open. Weak but aware. She reached for my hand. "Elena, did he?" I shook my head and smiled. "You don't need to worry, Mom. Wisteria's still standing. And so are we." Outside, the sun broke clean through the clouds. But I knew the storm wasn't over yet. Because Gavin still had one more secret. One that hadn't surfaced, yet. The next morning, I stood on the steps of Wisteria Manor as the mist lifted off the savanna grass. It was quiet. Almost too quiet. Inside, the scent of aged wood and jasmine lingered in the air, ghosted by years of laughter and loss. Riley met me by the grand staircase, holding a flash drive in one hand and a flashlight in the other. "She's still in the study," she said flatly. "We'll let the police take their time. UV dye's holding up well." We moved through the house, silent except for our footsteps echoing off the marble floors. And then we stopped in front of the fireplace. I pulled out the tiny brass key my grandmother Evelyn had hidden in her letter. My fingers hesitated at the molding under the hearth. I pressed a hidden latch and a drawer slid open with a soft clunk. Inside lay a velvet pouch and a sealed manila folder, brittle at the edges. The pouch contained an heirloom brooch, but the folder, Riley and I both leaned closer. Inside were copies of the real original will. Not the one Gavin had faked. Not the one he thought he destroyed. The one Evelyn had written by hand, witnessed and notarized. It contained clauses that named me as sole steward of the estate in the event of deception, forgery, or exploitation by any legal spouse. Gavin had tried to bury this truth. But Evelyn had made sure it would find the light. There was more. Dozens of pages of detailed notes in Evelyn's handwriting. Names. Lawyers. Timelines. Gavin's name appeared more than once, long before they even married. Evelyn had known. She had investigated him before the wedding. "Too charming," she'd once whispered to me after dinner. "The ones who smile the most always hide the deepest cracks." She had warned me. But I had been too in love, too eager to believe I could fix a man like Gavin. The truth was, I had invited the serpent into the garden myself. Riley loaded the documents onto her laptop, scanning for timestamps and inconsistencies. "This is more than enough to press federal charges," she murmured. "But there's something else." She flipped the screen around. It was a list, Gavin's list, recovered from a password-protected file we hadn't cracked until now. 23 names. Families. Each one matched to a medical crisis. A stroke. A heart attack. A cancer diagnosis. And next to each, a property address and the phrase "sale in progress." "He's been doing this for years," Riley whispered. "These aren't just one-offs. This is a blueprint." I clenched my fists, heat rising to my cheeks. And how many of them lost everything while they were grieving? The file had details about shell companies, wire transfers, and even offshore bank logs. He'd used trust funds and medical power of attorney forms like weapons. Gavin didn't just betray me. He'd preyed on the wounded, on the dying. And he had done it with precision. That afternoon, I met with Agent Marla Ruiz at the federal office downtown. She had already obtained a warrant to seize Gavin's digital records and assets. "We're preparing a multi-state investigation," she said as she reviewed the new evidence. "But there's something you should see." She handed me a printed email. It was from Gavin to a real estate attorney. The subject line made my stomach twist. "Final clean-out order. Destroy personal effects." It was dated 2 days ago. He was planning to bulldoze Wisteria tomorrow, Ruiz said. Not just the building. The safes. The documents. The memories. She paused. "The demolition company is already under investigation. It's another one of his shells." My throat felt dry. So if I hadn't frozen the trust transfers, I'd be watching my family history turn to ash. Ruiz nodded. He timed it for maximum erasure. That night, I returned to the manor. I walked room to room, running my fingers across the faded wallpaper and wainscoting. I stepped into Evelyn's study, where Tessa now sat on the floor, hands cuffed and eyes burning with panic under the faint purple glow of UV dye. She looked like a ghost. "You don't understand," she said as I opened the door for the officers. "Gavin said he'd take care of everything." I tilted my head. He did. Just not the way you expected. The officers took her without resistance. I stood at the bay window in the Grand Salon as the squad car disappeared into the fog. Then I noticed something strange. One of the security alerts had gone off in the basement. Riley and I moved fast. The hidden wine cellar door was ajar. Inside, we found a duffel bag tucked beneath the floorboards. It was filled with burner phones, SIM cards, bundles of cash, and one item that made my blood freeze. A USB drive labeled backup plan. Riley plugged it in upstairs. The files were encrypted, but the folder names were enough. Blackmail. Insurance policies. Medical authorizations. Passwords. One folder named EWH Ledger contained recordings, audio files from my phone calls with the hospital. The night of my mother's heart attack. The days leading up to it. Riley looked at me, horrified. He was tracking your calls. Waiting for the moment she got sick enough to disappear. I felt hollow. All this time, he had been listening. Recording. Calculating. I turned to the screen and pressed play. My voice came through, panicked and tearful. "She's not breathing. Please send help." Gavin's voice followed, cold and clinical. "Perfect." The rage burned through my chest like wildfire. But I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I saved it all. Because revenge this intricate needed calm hands. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. Wisteria stood tall beneath the bruised sky. And I was just beginning to understand how deep Gavin's plans had gone. Rain tapped against the stained glass windows of Wisteria Manor like a soft warning. I sat in the library, surrounded by the quiet wisdom of my ancestors, Evelyn's leather-bound law book still resting on the oak shelves, untouched. Riley had gone back to the FBI's local lab to help decrypt the files on the backup plan USB. I stayed behind, waiting for dawn, with nothing but thunder and memories for company. But Wisteria had always been more than a house. It was a living witness. And that night it started talking. It began with a small anomaly, an alert from the motion sensor in the East Wing, a part of the house we hadn't used in years. I hesitated before opening the app. Gavin had disabled the regular alarm system weeks ago, hoping I wouldn't notice. But Evelyn's system? He hadn't even known it existed. A hidden failsafe, operating separately, silently, installed after a break-in nearly 20 years ago. And it had recorded everything. I watched the screen come to life. Footage from weeks before. Gavin alone in the dining room, opening the false panel behind the china cabinet. I didn't even know it was there. He pulled out several folders and snapped pictures of them with his phone. Then he did something that made my stomach turn. He replaced the originals with forged copies. He wasn't just stealing assets. He was rewriting history. Riley returned hours later with a look that said everything. "We decrypted 3 folders," she said quietly. "He's been collecting leverage on potential victims. financial weaknesses, debts, even private health information. He had access to hospice care logs, terminal illness reports, trust fund activity. I blinked, speechless. How the hell did he get that? Through Tessa, she replied. She worked for a private health insurance broker before she ever met you. She still had access. Together, they harvested data and matched it with vulnerable families who owned generational properties. We went through the files. One name stood out. Kennedy Hargrave. Riley recognized it. She lost her father last year to pancreatic cancer. 2 months later, she sold her family's coastal estate for a fraction of its value to a shell company named Silverline Developments. That's Gavin. We cross-referenced it. He flipped the property, then transferred the funds to a Belize account registered under Tessa's maiden name. It wasn't just us. There were more victims. I took a breath, steadying myself. We need to call them. Every single one. Agent Ruiz joined us at Wisteria that evening. She'd already notified the Department of Justice. We're treating this as a multi-state property fraud ring with coordinated financial abuse. This goes beyond local jurisdiction now. She paused. But Elena, we found something else. She opened a laptop and played a voicemail from Gavin's burner phone. His voice was sharp, desperate. If anything goes wrong, activate fallback plan C. Tessa knows where the files are. Use the safety deposit box in Charleston. Destroy the originals. Wisteria is compromised. My mouth went dry. He has more documents stored off-site. Ruiz nodded. We already issued a federal warrant. Charleston PD is assisting. As Riley and Ruiz worked, I stepped into my grandmother's room. It hadn't changed. Her perfume still clung to the air. I sat on her old velvet chair and stared out the window at the garden below. In her diary, Evelyn had once written, "There will come a day when this house will be tested. May it remember who it belongs to." I whispered to her memory. It remembered, Grandma. It remembered. Then my phone buzzed again. This time from a contact I hadn't heard from in over a year. A man named Felix Brower. A retired estate lawyer who had once handled Wisteria's legal affairs before retiring to Oregon. "Elena," he said, his voice cautious. "I've just been contacted by someone claiming to be your husband. He wants me to verify your mental competency and your mother's power of attorney. He says you're emotionally unstable and that he's taking over full control." I almost dropped the phone. "He's trying to declare me unfit?" "That's what it looks like," Felix replied. "But I haven't acted on anything." I remembered Evelyn's instructions. She said if Gavin ever came to me, I was to call you first. It was a new tactic. With his financial exits blocked and his body in custody, Gavin was playing one final card: character assassination. If he could declare me mentally unstable or claim I was forging my mother's care decisions, he could launch a legal appeal to recover some of the trust's assets. He was desperate. And dangerous. Riley was already tracing his communications. "He's using a third party now," she said. "We think it's a legal firm out of Miami. Offshore assets. You're going to be served soon. He's filing an emergency petition to challenge your mental fitness." I clenched my jaw. Then we go to war. We spent the next 2 days gathering every document, every video file, every transaction linked to Gavin and Tessa. Ruiz contacted victims across 3 states. Lawsuits began to form. Depositions were scheduled. And meanwhile, Wisteria Manor became a command center of justice. And in the quiet hours of night, I returned to Evelyn's study, sat in her chair, and opened the family ledger once more. I found a note she had scribbled years ago, long before any of this happened. "A man who destroys homes never knows what it means to build one." And I realized, this fight wasn't just about exposing Gavin. It was about honoring every woman in my family who had held this house up through grief, war, betrayal, and silence. And I would not be the one who let it fall. By the time I received the formal court summons, I was ready. Gavin's emergency petition was filled with slander, claims of emotional instability, mental breakdowns, and unfit decision-making regarding my mother's care. He painted me as a grieving daughter unraveling under pressure, suggesting that the trust was being mismanaged, that I had fabricated documents, and, most grotesquely, that I had manipulated my own mother's medical situation to seize control of the estate. I sat in the courthouse parking lot, staring at the copy of his affidavit. "This is how low he's willing to sink," I whispered. Riley glanced at me. "Then it's time to show them how high we can rise." Inside the courtroom, the air was stiff with tension. Gavin had shaved, worn a navy suit, cleaned up like a man on a mission to manipulate sympathy. His attorney, a sharp-tongued Miami professional named Jordan Phelps, strutted in like he owned the place. Gavin didn't look at me once. But I looked at him. And I didn't blink. The judge, a woman named Celeste Monroe, took her seat. "We're here to assess the validity of Mr. Gavin Whitmore's emergency petition, and to determine whether Mrs. Elena Whitmore has acted in violation of estate management, trust operation, or medical power of attorney." Gavin's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, we present evidence that Mrs. Whitmore has demonstrated emotional instability during her mother's hospitalization, made unilateral financial decisions, and has refused to consult her husband on matters of shared marital property." I rose slowly, calm as ice. "May I respond, Your Honor?" Judge Monroe nodded. Briefly. I walked to the bench and opened the file in my hand. "This is the irrevocable trust, created by Evelyn Harrington, notarized and filed 15 years ago. The estate in question is not marital property. It is protected by legal clauses triggered by deception, fraud, and financial coercion." I handed the document to the clerk, then pulled out a second folder. "This," I said, "is a forensic audit showing that Mr. Whitmore illegally transferred $1.3 million from family accounts into offshore companies, attempted to forge my mother's insurance cancellation, and had plans to demolish the estate to eliminate all physical evidence of his fraud." Judge Monroe raised an eyebrow. "Do you have proof of these allegations?" Riley stood at the back of the room and lifted a laptop bag. "We do. And more." The judge called a recess so the evidence could be reviewed. In the hallway, Gavin finally approached me. His voice low. "You're doing all this for what? A house? Some broken legacy?" I leaned in and answered calmly. "No, Gavin. I'm doing this because you underestimated every woman who's ever carried the weight of that house on her back. You stole from the dying. You erased the past. You thought no one would notice. But we did." When the court resumed, Agent Ruiz entered with a federal affidavit. "Your Honor, we're submitting evidence from a parallel investigation involving Mr. Whitmore. He is a suspect in an ongoing fraud case targeting terminally ill estate owners across 3 states. His accomplice, Tessa Monroe, was apprehended inside the Whitmore estate in possession of stolen documents and marked with ultraviolet trace evidence tied to a protected vault." It was as if the courtroom tilted. Gavin's attorney tried to object, but the judge shut him down. "These are criminal implications. This hearing will now include the pending investigation." Gavin looked at me, pale. I watched the man who once kissed my forehead in the morning now shrink behind his lawyer. The prosecutor from the fraud division stepped in and took over. "We are filing charges for wire fraud, document forgery, insurance tampering, and attempted destruction of federal evidence. We have reason to believe this was an organized scheme targeting vulnerable families. We request Mr. Whitmore be remanded into federal custody without bail." The judge agreed. Gavin's expression cracked for the first time. His bravado drained from his eyes like color from a dying flame. "Elena," he said as they handcuffed him, "you think this is over?" I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The slamming of the courtroom door behind him said more than I ever could. But this victory wasn't about one courtroom. It wasn't even about justice for me. There were other names. Other families. Other homes that had been stolen, flipped, and erased like they never mattered. Riley and I spent the next week contacting every single person from Gavin's target list. Some cried when they realized they weren't alone. Others were still paying off debts Gavin had set into motion. "He used our grief like a bargaining chip," one widow told me, her voice shaking. "And he smiled while doing it." We collected testimonials, sworn statements, shared files with the DOJ's victim outreach team. Riley organized a secure database of every transaction, down to the cent. And when the press finally caught wind of the case, headlines flooded in. "Savannah woman exposes multi-state estate fraud ring. Husband used illness to steal generational wealth. Wisteria Manor. The house that fought back." Wisteria Manor. She was more than just a house. She was a survivor. And in the weeks that followed, I walked her halls not as a woman betrayed, but as a woman rebuilding. But as I stood in Evelyn's study one final time that summer night, the wind rattled the shutters gently. And I couldn't shake the feeling that Gavin had left one final thread untied. A week after Gavin's arraignment, Wisteria Manor had returned to a strange sense of calm. The demolition company had withdrawn their crews, and the fake surveys Gavin submitted were already being shredded by investigators. But as I walked through the halls in the late hours of the evening, I couldn't ignore the lingering unease. Gavin was behind bars. Tessa was awaiting trial. The bank accounts were frozen. And yet, something still didn't feel finished. That unease became reality when Riley burst through the front doors at dusk, breathless and holding a manila envelope. "It was mailed anonymously," she said. "No return address. Delivered to my office, not yours." I took the envelope with caution. No handwriting. No stamp. Just a smear of red wax like the ones my grandmother used for her private letters. Inside were three things: a vintage photograph, a deed transfer document, and a single sticky note with one word scribbled across it in Gavin's handwriting. Checkmate. The photo was of Wisteria Manor, taken in 1992, long before the renovations. I stared at it for nearly a full minute before Riley realized what was off. "That front wing. It's not there now." She was right. Part of the east garden veranda had once extended into what used to be a greenhouse, but it had since been bricked over and sealed. The deed transfer document was more alarming. It was a forged quitclaim deed, signed as if my mother had willingly turned the entire property over to Gavin just 3 weeks before her heart attack. The signature was almost perfect. Almost. "Do you think he had this filed somewhere?" I asked. Riley shook her head. "No, we already checked county records. But this means one thing: he planned to. This was his backup plan if the trust documents failed." I looked at the note again. Checkmate. Gavin was never one to bluff. If he sent this, it meant something was still in motion. Something buried deeper than the rest. We returned to the photo, this time with a flashlight and Evelyn's floor plans in hand. It took 2 hours to find it. The faint outline of a hatch beneath a faded oriental rug in the old drawing room, just a few feet from where my mother had once painted her watercolors. Riley pried it open. The wood groaned in protest as decades of dust stirred into the air. Inside the crawlspace was a tin lockbox, rusted at the edges but intact. It was heavy, sealed with a mechanical dial and no keyhole. "Combination lock," Riley muttered. "Old school. Do you think your grandmother would have written it down?" I wasn't sure. Evelyn trusted memory over paper. But she also believed in stories. I stepped into her old bedroom, sat at the vanity she'd used for half a century, and stared into the mirror. Then it came to me. Her favorite number. She used it in everything. The combination of her wedding date, the year she inherited the manor, and the number of rooms the house once had before restoration. I whispered the digits to myself as Riley entered them one by one. The lock clicked open. Inside were dozens of envelopes, some addressed, some blank. Some contained keys, some contained negatives of old photographs. But one envelope had my name on it, written in Evelyn's elegant, looping script. It read, "For when he tries to erase you." My hands shook as I unfolded the letter. Evelyn's words poured out like whispers from the grave. Asterisk Elena, if you're reading this, then the snake we let in the garden has tried to poison the roots. But I promise you, everything he built is made of paper. You are the stone. Use what I've left to burn the house of cards. You'll find the rest in the fireplace. Asterisk. I looked up. The fireplace? Back in Evelyn's study, we examined every inch of the antique hearth. Tapping, listening, prying. Then I found it. A panel beneath the mantel that clicked inward. A false compartment slid open, revealing a smaller box lined with velvet. Inside was a flash drive and a black and white composition notebook filled with Gavin's handwriting. "He documented everything," Riley said as she flipped through the pages. Transactions. Meeting notes. How he targeted each victim. The names of his shell companies. Dates. Times. Even the script he used to manipulate the buyers. She held up the flash drive. "And this probably has backups of everything he thought he'd destroyed." We rushed to upload it to a secure system. It was worse than we imagined. A full video confession, recorded months earlier. Gavin alone in a hotel room, speaking into the camera as if preparing a legal insurance policy. If you're watching this, he began, then I either got caught or got killed. Either way, let's make sure the truth only hurts those who deserve it. He listed every family he had defrauded, every medical record he accessed, every offshore account, every lie. The date on the recording was 2 days before he sent me the text about selling the house. This was his insurance. Or maybe his final play. I called Agent Ruiz immediately. We found something, I said. Her voice sharpened. We've just had a development too. One of Gavin's encrypted accounts just attempted a wire transfer. He set it to trigger automatically after 21 days without login. That timer ends tomorrow morning. I stared at the screen. So this was timed. Exactly, she said. We need to stop that transfer. We need every account number. Now. Riley began uploading everything to the DOJ's task force. I backed up 3 copies of the video, one to the FBI, one to an independent firm in Atlanta, and one to a vault Evelyn had established for family legal records. The notebook went into evidence. The flash drive into a steel case. The walls of Wisteria had spoken. And they would not be silenced again. But the night wasn't over. Because Agent Ruiz called back 10 minutes later with a voice like steel. Elena. Gavin had a second partner. And we just found out who. The line went dead for a moment after Agent Ruiz said those words. I stood in the center of Evelyn's study, the rain hammering against the windows behind me, waiting for her to continue. My grip tightened around the armrest of my grandmother's chair, heart pounding in my chest. Say that again, I whispered. Ruiz's voice returned, clipped and urgent. Gavin wasn't working alone. Tessa was just a distraction. There's someone else. Someone who had access to both the medical information and your family trust. We believe it's someone inside the law firm that handled the Harrington estate. Possibly even someone who knew your grandmother personally. I couldn't speak. My mind raced through every name, every handshake, every polite smile from attorneys who had once promised to protect us. But one name stood out. Charles Edmund. An estate planner from Charleston who had managed Evelyn's documents during her final years. He had attended the funeral, sent flowers, and more than once, suggested revisions to the trust that Evelyn had politely declined. Ruiz continued, we traced multiple offshore accounts used by Gavin back to a consulting firm registered under Edmund's initials, CE Management Group. It's a shell. And it's been active since 2 years before your wedding. I staggered back into the chair. So he's been watching us, for nearly 2 decades? Waiting. Ruiz confirmed. Until you were vulnerable. Until Evelyn passed. Until Margaret's health declined. Riley slammed her laptop shut. He's been playing the long game. This wasn't about money. It was about control. Legacy. They wanted the entire Harrington estate system under their thumb. I looked down at the original will still resting on the desk. And if we hadn't found Evelyn's backup documents, they would have succeeded. That night, we drove to Charleston under the cover of darkness. Ruiz arranged a federal warrant for Edmund's records, but Riley and I weren't waiting for the system to catch up. We needed to see it ourselves. Edmund's office was inside a quiet brownstone on a tree-lined street. His name still sat proudly on the brass plate outside. But the moment we stepped in, I could feel something was off. Too clean. Too quiet. Inside, the office was stripped. Files gone. Drawers emptied. Computers wiped. We're too late, Riley muttered. He knew Gavin was arrested. He's covering his tracks. But not well enough. In the fireplace, beneath a pile of half-burned envelopes, Riley pulled out one unscorched slip of paper. It was a wiring confirmation dated 2 days before Gavin's arrest. $450,000 sent to a private account in Luxembourg. Recipient. CE Management Group. We didn't speak for a long time. Just stared at the embered edges of the truth. Edmund had helped Gavin build the entire scheme. While Tessa played the role of mistress and distraction, Edmund had provided the infrastructure. The paperwork, the legal loopholes, the connections. He had known Evelyn. Probably admired her legacy. And yet, had plotted to dismantle it piece by piece. When Ruiz arrived with agents, she found what we couldn't. A hidden server room in the back, beneath a trapdoor masked by a cabinet. Inside were boxes of hard drives, printouts, and audio recordings. Dozens of them, including some featuring Gavin and Edmund discussing targets. One recording made my stomach lurch. Elena doesn't have the stomach to fight. She's sentimental. She'll fold. My voice turned sharp. Play that again. Riley did. And there it was. Edmund's voice. Cold. Confident. The house will break her. She's weak like her mother. Once the old woman dies, the daughter will crumble. I had never even spoken to him more than twice. He had judged me from a distance and decided that I was an obstacle he could step over. I felt fire rush into my veins. Evelyn was right all along. The snake never comes through the front door. He waits in the tall grass until you forget he's there. Ruiz began processing the scene, and the next day, federal agents issued a formal arrest warrant for Charles Edmund. But he was gone. His home in Hilton Head was abandoned. His car was found in Savannah, 3 blocks from Wisteria Manor. Empty. No sign of a break-in. No note. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window in my old bedroom, watching the lights flicker across the garden paths Evelyn had once tended with bare hands. Everything Gavin had tried to destroy was still standing. But Edmund? He was still out there. Still watching. And just when I thought the worst was behind me, another letter arrived. This time, delivered by hand. No return address. Just my name. Inside was a single photo, taken from outside Wisteria's gate. Dated yesterday. On the back, a message written in tight script. Asterisk, you won the game. But not the war. Asterisk. I didn't flinch. I walked into Evelyn's study, opened the family safe, and placed the photo beside every piece of evidence we had gathered. Then I turned on the camera Riley had installed, one of 6 now streaming live to federal servers. Because this house would not be caught off guard again. And neither would I. Morning light streamed through Wisteria Manor's arched windows, golden and unbothered, as if unaware of the shadow hanging over the estate. The photo from the mysterious letter lay on the study desk, still fresh, the ink from its timestamp slightly smudged. Whoever had taken it had stood no more than 30 feet from the gate. Too close. Too deliberate. And if it really was Edmund, he had either returned to Savannah or never left at all. Riley reviewed the property's camera feeds from the past 36 hours. He's smart, she said. Never steps inside. Just lingers outside blind spots. She zoomed in on a frame showing a blurred figure behind a magnolia tree at the edge of the fence. Fedora. Glasses. Gray coat. That's not coincidence. He knows where the old cameras end and the new ones begin. We alerted Agent Ruiz. Within the hour, 2 unmarked vehicles were stationed near the manor, their occupants hidden in plain sight. We don't want to spook him, Ruiz explained. Let him get confident. Let him return. But if he does, we'll be waiting. But I wasn't planning to wait. Instead, I went to the one place Gavin had never dared to touch. My grandmother's private greenhouse. It had long since been bricked into a forgotten wing of the manor after a storm damaged it in 2009, but the interior remained intact. Evelyn had loved this place. Called it her mind's garden. And I remembered her once telling me, "A true secret is never in a vault, Elena. It's where no one thinks to look. Beneath the things they've stopped valuing." I swept away the dust, peeled back old canvas drapes, and unlocked the rusted entry with Evelyn's iron key. The smell of soil and age rushed out like a trapped memory. Vines had overtaken most of the walls, but the stone floor was still visible, uneven in one corner. I knelt beside it, noticing a strange discoloration. With a crowbar Riley handed me, I pried it loose. Beneath the stone was a leather pouch wrapped in wax cloth. Inside, we found a stack of documents dating back decades. Handwritten letters between Evelyn and a private investigator. Some were about Edmund. His financial behavior. Connections to offshore accounts even back in the 90s. She suspected him even before Gavin, I said quietly. She was building a case all along. There were also photos. Edmund attending fundraisers. Edmund visiting other families who mysteriously lost property soon after medical emergencies. One image chilled me. A young Gavin, fresh out of law school, shaking Edmund's hand at a garden party. Evelyn had scribbled a note on the back. If they ever work together, it won't be by accident. Riley called Ruiz immediately. We just found premeditated correspondence. Your timeline goes back 25 years now. This wasn't a scheme, it was a generational theft plan in slow motion. While the evidence was processed, I walked the halls of Wisteria, trying to grasp the sheer scale of it. My entire adult life had been played like a game of chess. Every move, every crisis, every loss, watched, calculated, positioned. That evening, just after sundown, another motion alert triggered. This time, it wasn't Edmund. It was his son. A man named Camden Edmund, who had legally changed his last name 5 years earlier. Likely to dodge scrutiny once federal probes began sniffing around his father. He wore a tan delivery vest, holding a clipboard, pretending to be lost as he stepped onto the lawn. But the way his eyes scanned the windows told me he wasn't looking for an address. He was looking for access. I didn't answer the door. I activated the intercom instead. Your father's gone underground. But his records aren't. You're being watched. You have 10 seconds to leave before federal agents make their way to you. He didn't respond. Just stood still, frozen for a heartbeat, then turned and walked away. Ruiz confirmed later that night that Camden had fled town. The car he used was registered to a dissolved LLC linked to Edmund's law practice. But he left something behind, a slip of paper on our garden bench, caught under a clay pot. It was a map. Not of Wisteria, but of another property in Bluffton, South Carolina. Circled in red. Riley traced the address to a storage facility rented under a trust connected to Gavin's Shell Corporation. This might be it, she said. The final dump site. The place where they hid everything too dangerous to destroy. Ruiz agreed. By morning, we were on the road with a federal warrant in hand. The storage unit was built to look unassuming. Tin doors, concrete aisles, dust-coated locks. But behind one sliding panel was a private archive unlike anything I'd ever seen. Files, tapes, contracts, voicemails, photos. And not just of my family. Dozens of families. Each with a file marked. Asterisk target identified. Timeline activated. Asterisk. One file was labeled Whitmore. Final extraction. Inside was a draft of a press release, falsely announcing my mother's passing, the collapse of the trust, and the sale of Wisteria to a company named Harrington Equity Holdings. They had it ready, I whispered. They were going to erase us like we never existed. We gathered everything, documented every piece, and handed it over to the DOJ's task force. Ruiz stared at the evidence in disbelief. This is beyond fraud. It's a national crime ring. And it had almost worked. But Wisteria had spoken. And Evelyn had whispered louder from the grave than Gavin and Edmund ever expected. Now we just had to bring it all to court. The war wasn't over. But the battlefield had changed. It was a strange kind of stillness that filled the federal courthouse on the first morning of the trial. Not silence exactly. There was the shuffle of papers, the muted conversation of attorneys, the occasional clatter of heels on polished floors, but an unspoken weight hung over the proceedings. This was no ordinary case. The Department of Justice had consolidated the charges into a sweeping indictment. Conspiracy to commit wire fraud, financial elder abuse, forgery of federal documents, unlawful surveillance, and destruction of protected historical property. And at the center of it all stood Gavin Whitmore. He was thinner now, his once pristine appearance dulled by months in custody. He didn't make eye contact as the bailiff led him to his seat. But I saw it, the flicker of calculation still alive in his eyes, as if part of him believed he could still twist the narrative. As if charm could still undo chains. But today, charm had no place here. The prosecution opened with precision. This is not a story of a single betrayal, the lead attorney stated. This is the systemic targeting of vulnerable families. A coordinated assault on grief, legacy, and trust. And the defendant, Gavin Whitmore, did not act alone. He built a network of deceit that spanned over a decade. He knew what he was doing. And he did it without remorse. Then came the exhibits. One by one, they were projected onto a screen so large it felt impossible to ignore them. Gavin's voice recordings, calmly detailing how to time property transfers with terminal diagnoses. His messages to Charles Edmund, laughing over forged signatures. The surveillance clips of Tessa removing heirlooms from Wisteria. The automated wire transfer orders set to activate upon my mother's death certificate. I watched jurors flinch. Some gasped. Others scribbled notes with shaking hands. Then it was my turn. They called me to the stand as a key witness. I walked slowly, deliberately, holding the original flash drive Evelyn had hidden beneath the garden. The courtroom watched as I described in detail how I had uncovered each layer. The forged insurance cancellations. The audio recordings. The missing heirlooms. The attempt to declare me mentally unfit. The demolition plan. The attempt to fabricate my mother's death to trigger a false asset release. But it wasn't the documents that held the room. It was the moment I read aloud Evelyn's final note. Asterisk, he who builds his house on lies should fear the wind. Because one day, it will howl through the cracks and carry everything away. Asterisk. Even the defense lawyer stopped writing. The prosecution brought up additional victims. A widow from Charleston who had been convinced to sell her estate for medical relief. An elderly man from Athens who had signed a power of attorney document while recovering from surgery. Documents Gavin had arranged. And finally, a nurse from the hospice care network testified that she had once been approached by Charles Edmund for routine updates on patients. He offered her money to provide confidential health timelines. Gavin's defense strategy collapsed by the third day. His lawyers tried to argue that he had acted under emotional distress, financial pressure, even suggesting he had been manipulated by Edmund. But the recordings painted a different story. A man who reveled in his cleverness, who called grieving families easy exits, and described legacy homes as buried gold. Then, unexpectedly on the fourth day, the courtroom doors opened, and in walked Charles Edmund. Handcuffed. Flanked by marshals. He had been caught attempting to board a private vessel off the Georgia coast. His arrest had been sealed to avoid media frenzy, but now as he stood before the court, the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. His cooperation changed everything. Edmund pleaded guilty on the spot in exchange for reduced sentencing and agreed to submit all documentation of his 2-decade partnership with Gavin. He confirmed what Evelyn had always feared. Gavin had been recruited after law school, groomed to charm his way into wealthy families. Tessa had been planted to seduce him further into the plan. Every move had been rehearsed. Every timeline. Deliberate. I sat in the back of the courtroom, gripping my seat, feeling Evelyn's presence beside me as if her hand still rested gently on my shoulder. Wisteria had survived. But the cost had been steep. On the final day, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty. On all counts. Gavin turned toward me as they prepared to take him away. For the first time, his mask cracked. Not rage. Not smugness. Panic. He mouthed something I didn't understand. Then he was gone. Outside, the courthouse steps were crowded with press. Microphones. Questions. But I said nothing. Instead, I returned home. To Wisteria. The house stood quiet as I stepped inside, yet it felt more alive than ever. The sunlight filtering through the parlor windows caught on the dust dancing in the air. The smell of lavender drifted from the garden where my mother now walked again, cane in hand, stronger every day. The estate was no longer under siege. But just when I thought it was over, Riley walked into the study, her phone screen pale with a new message. "You need to see this," she said. And when I read it, I froze. A new encrypted email. Untraceable origin. Subject: the ledger wasn't complete. Attached was a single file. And a message. Wisteria is only the beginning. The message was brief, but its implications thundered through me like a storm. Wisteria is only the beginning. That was the line. Short. Ominous. Loaded with intent. Riley's fingers danced across the keyboard as she attempted to decrypt the attached file. The encryption was advanced. Military grade, she whispered, but the file size wasn't massive. It was compact. Purposeful. As if whoever sent it knew exactly what they wanted me to see and nothing more. 10 minutes later, the screen flickered, and the contents unfolded. Blueprints. Not of houses. Not of trust funds. But of people. A network chart. There were names, at least 30 of them, connected with lines like an underground spiderweb. Some I recognized, real estate agents, elder care managers, even a probate judge from North Carolina. Others were unknown to me. Each had small digital footnotes attached. Transactions, bribes, notes on personality types. One section marked in red. Candidates for inheritance acquisition. And then, at the bottom of the file, a single folder labeled Vault 2, Whitmore Contingency. What the hell is Vault 2? Riley asked under her breath. We clicked it. Inside were digitized scans of journal entries. Gavin's handwriting. A twisted archive of the plan he'd always denied existed. It was worse than I imagined. Gavin hadn't just wanted to erase me and take Wisteria. He had plans for the entire Harrington line. There were notes on how to manipulate Margaret, suggestions on how to institutionalize my mother using falsified assessments, and a horrifying entry that read, ** Once Elena is discredited, Wisteria can be legally transitioned under Edmund Trust. Estimated time, 13 weeks. ** He had planned the timeline down to days. But most disturbing of all was an audio file dated 2 days before his arrest. It was a voice memo. Gavin's voice, calm and clear. If you're hearing this, then things didn't go as expected. And that means Elena found the garden. Clever girl. I told Charles she'd be trouble. Should have handled her before she got too bold. Doesn't matter now. Because Wisteria was never the endgame. It was the blueprint. The test. There are 7 other properties, across 5 states, and each one is wired to fall when the timing is right. If Elena wants to stop it, she'll have to find Vault 3. I slammed the laptop shut. My chest was tight, my thoughts racing. This wasn't over. It never had been. He had laid landmines across the country. Families like mine, legacies like ours, each one unaware that someone was quietly planning their erasure. And Vault 3? What else had he hidden? That night, I sat in the study alone, a single light on. I ran my fingers along the edge of the mantel, pausing at the small notch in the wood Evelyn used to hide coins when I was a girl. I pushed it. Nothing happened. Then I remembered, 3 presses, 1 pause, a final press. I tried it. Click. A panel in the wall shifted. Inside was a leather-bound journal. A different one. Not Gavin's. Evelyn's. The first page read, if you are reading this, it means you've chosen not just to protect Wisteria, but to protect every family like ours. I didn't sleep. For the next 2 days, Riley and I went through every contact Evelyn had left in her old files. We found the names of caretakers, estate lawyers, librarians, people scattered across Georgia, South Carolina, Virginia. Many had passed, but some hadn't. One woman, a former archivist in Charleston, agreed to meet me in secret. When I told her Evelyn's name, she took my hand with shaking fingers and whispered, she warned us this day would come. Then she handed me a key. Brass. Engraved with the number 3. I returned to Wisteria that night, standing alone in the cellar, where the air was cold and damp. I examined every brick, every beam, until I found it. A locked iron hatch built into the far wall behind the old wine racks. The key fit. Slowly, carefully I turned it. The hatch creaked open, revealing a dark stone passageway. Stale air rushed out. At the far end, a sealed vault door with Evelyn's initials carved in the center. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle. Behind that door I knew was everything. The truth about Gavin. The depth of the network. The next move. And as I stood at the threshold, heart pounding, I realized. This wasn't revenge anymore. It was legacy. Mine. Evelyn's voice echoed in my memory. * We don't run from ghosts, Elena. We chase them out. *. And that's exactly what I was about to do.